Welcome to our esteemed panelists. You've enjoyed a morning of great keynote addresses and some sessions, and now we're going to move on to a Q&A. And I actually invite you to all send your questions around Panel Sensor. We've already got a series of excellent questions, and we want to turn this session into a discussion in this room. So instead of just going through a series of questions, I'm going to invite the panelists to disagree with one another and banter and really turn this into a conversation. So without further ado, I wanted to start by saying, with the current crisis, and I'm sure you're all tired of talking about it, but everybody globally is acutely aware of it. The situation that Greece is in right now with the extremely high employment, there's obviously, we're here for some level of inspiration and training and coaching, but I wanted to really pose to the panel, you each had a unique way of really presenting a series of opportunities or a methodology of approaching these problems. Steve, you referred to as pulling the string. Chris, you spoke very much about identifying social entrepreneurship, things that matter. How can one go about spotting these opportunities? I think once you've already got your idea and you're in it, that's one thing. But let's talk a little bit, why don't we have a little bit of a discussion around going about spotting those opportunities, and let's take the current situation here in Greece into account. Who can we start with? Steve, I'm going to throw that one to you.
I think it's a matter of going around with your eyes wide open and experiencing problems in your day-to-day. That's what I touched on this when I was speaking, but there's a class of companies that get created by students who they're trying, like if you go to do the business school business plan competitions every year, there's probably at least 2 wedding registries, right? There's like delivery and food, and it's all the stuff about socializing because that's where they are in their career or in their life, right? When you get B2B ones, it's more someone had an experience in a particular field. And that's why I mentioned Kiva Systems, where Mick Mount basically, was taping a $20 bill to every shipment at Webvan that went out, right? If they didn't automate, they couldn't get to something. So it's about being observant on these problems that you're facing. And in the case of Webvan, it was obvious they were losing money, right? So how do I solve that problem? And here, there's a lot of challenges with the intersection between citizens and government. I got to believe there's just a ton of observations, right? How is there a way to make that better, right? It's picking any one of these areas that, aren't working, effectively. I mean, if you're in a particular industry, of course, you're looking for ways to make that more effective, make it more successful. The beauty of today is you have a global reach of access to information and opportunities, but you got to just be eyes wide open.
I'm going to talk about another body part, which isn't having your eyes open. It's keeping your mouth closed and your ears open, which is just to listen to the people around you that are telling you about the problems that they're having. It's very, very obvious that a lot of people have a lot of problems all the time, but how could you ever address or think to even recognize their problems if you're just talking about yourself and the stuff you want to do all the time? I personally believe that the only reason that I got into this 3D printing business was because of that interaction that I had at the tech fair when people said that they had this problem and people that didn't have it expected the technology to be that way. We wouldn't have done this. I would have been still working on those other ideas or in grad school or something else in my life. And it was because I had that aha moment and I listened to somebody that we were able to solve that problem. And I would encourage politicians in this country and just around the world to stop talking and listen a little bit more. And that's how you'll actually figure out what the most critical problems are and what are hurting people the most.
I agree with everything you guys said. I think it's a time of opportunity for Greece, essentially, because in Canada, in my current position, I spend a lot of time thinking about how do we continue to innovate? How do we make sure we don't settle for the status quo? And the answer is obsess. Obsess about the world around you, obsess about problems, identify them, go hard on them. And you literally have to obsess in order to find them. But over here, there's so many problems around you. And it's just an opportunity to just decide on which one you care about the most and just tackle that. It's right in front of you. Problems are opportunities. And if you can do business in Greece with all the obstacles that are in front of you, trust me, you can do business anywhere.
Yeah, I would just punctuate what these folks have said by saying that you are in an opportunity-rich environment. Innovation happens because of constraint. When you are fat, dumb, and happy, and everything is wonderful in the world, there is no need to innovate because life is just fabulous. But when you have constraint, when there's not enough money, not enough resource, not enough time, you have to innovate to get something done. You're in an environment now which demands a lot of innovation, but where these problems, as you said, are evident. And identifying one of those that you can get your arms around, listening to what you're hearing from your colleagues, from your peers, from fellow citizens, just being open to what's out there. I think that's where you're going to identify great opportunities and things that spark your passion to begin to go and to address.
And it's also more, if I may just jump in, more substantial innovation as well, to a certain extent, because we see Silicon Valley today with all its hype. We see a lot of startups there that pick up, go viral, and at the end of the day, what they have produced is, recently in the news, the Yo app, an app where you just yo people, you just send yo. I mean, what problem does that really solve? And yet it's well funded, they're doing pretty well. You have to be in a state where you're actually building something substantial for that to last as well. And I think that there's opportunity for that here today.
Okay. Well, our next most popular question, and this is not to anyone in particular here, when should I drop everything and focus 100% on my startup?
I mean, for most people, that's a question of financial budgeting, right? I mean, you have to look at your trade-offs and what you can afford to do. I'd say that's your first hurdle. I think the second hurdle would be, have you vetted what you're pursuing enough to know it has legs, right? You should be able to pull the string on a lot of it without having to drop everything else, right? You should have been able to do some of that, such that you have a path figured out to get to your big milestone. You know what you want to get done, right? I wouldn't necessarily drop everything until you figured that out.
Okay.
I want to turn this, because yes, I think you should vet an idea and try to make sure that there's some substance there, but have you ever done a ropes course and you're kind of in that place where you're on the tightrope and you're holding on to one end, and the only way you can get to the other side is by letting go? And that's when you make progress. I think what happens sometimes when we're building companies, and I've made this mistake, is that we try to keep our safety net there. We try to make sure that we can't get hurt. And so we don't let go and we don't take those steps forward. And that constrains you from actually taking the risk. I know that there's a lot of pain and concern and worry about risk and about failure, but if you don't try, if you don't risk that failure, you're not going to move forward. I think that when you decide that there's no turning back, that's when you have to put all your energy into being successful and to continue to pull the string, to keep your eyes and ears open for these ways to get ahead. If there's always sort of the way to run back and be safe, you don't take the risk, and I don't think push as hard.
I'll look at this from a slightly different angle, which is drop everything when you've persuaded other people to drop everything with you. Which is, you shouldn't be starting an endeavor as a team of I. It needs to be a team of we. Everything I've accomplished in my life has been in a team effort with some of the brightest people that I've had the pleasure to work with. And I love all the work that I've done with them, and more importantly, I love the people much more than the work that's been accomplished. And if you're starting a business and you plan to be the CEO and the leader, that's number one. You need to be a leader. You need to persuade people to follow you. And you should not be dropping everything if nobody's willing to follow you.
What role do you think luck plays in success?
I think luck can give you the opportunities, but perseverance is what helps you seize the opportunity. Luck lets you see it. We came up with the idea to automatically remove parts. I thought it was lucky that we came up with that idea, but we could have stopped pursuing it. I could have gone and done other things. We all could have gone and done other things, but it was the perseverance that when people told us that the education space was a bad place to go into and that everything that we were doing was wrong actually turned out to be correct. It was the perseverance that enabled us to succeed, not the luck. Luck does play a role in the ideation, I think, but not in the actual execution.
I'll give you an example of luck. So 2001, after the bubble collapse, the first year-over-year decline in IT spending, I had one customer from the summer of 2000, right, trying to get to my second customer in 2001, right? And who wants to be customer number 2 of a venture-backed software company in 2001, especially one that's going to, by the time we got to August, it was especially one that's going to run out of cash in 8 weeks, okay? And so we finally got a first term sheet, and we were trying to get a better one. And this firm, we had 10 interested prospects. They weren't customers, and I had to be really careful because lots of people, there were lots of prospective investors. No one was really investing, right? Keep in mind, the number of companies vying for funding in 2001 was far greater than the funds available. Okay. Turns out this particular firm, I didn't give them one of our very interested prospects. But it turns out that partner that's doing diligence is having a weekend barbecue with his next door neighbor, who's one of the executives at that company, who's one of our champions, and just starts talking us up. What are the odds of that? Right? And all of a sudden they had their own proprietary diligence versus just the names I gave them. That's how we got a term sheet, and we closed, the week after 9/11 on the financing. Right? That's just pure luck. I mean, if that hadn't happened, probably wouldn't have had the financing, would have had a much worse outcome.
I think I look at this question of luck a little bit differently. I think in hindsight, we can, all of us look at a place in our career and our lives and we thought, wow, I really got lucky there. To me, luck is winning the lottery. Luck is something that's completely by chance. All the rest of it is where your hard work and preparation met an opportunity. If you hadn't really worked that first person, if they hadn't believed in what you were doing, it wouldn't have mattered that they were having burgers together to barbecue. So, I think a friend of mine used to say that the harder I work, the luckier I get. Mm-hmm. And I think it's our hard work, our preparation for these opportunities that make us lucky.
Okay.
I agree as well. It's a lot of people will say I was at the right place at the right time, but you've been in many places at many times in your life. And it's just about recognizing that is an opportunity, which you're truly only going to know in the end. And you have to learn how to live with incomplete information at the time and jump into it.
Okay. I'm going to start with you on the next question. How do you know when an idea is good?
Oh, I have a rule for that. That if I bounce it off of somebody and they tell me I'm completely crazy, that's when I know it's good. Because a lot of people will disagree, and a lot of people will say, you're wasting your time. But imagine what these people would say when you're actually doing it, when you're impacting the world.
An interesting question. Here's one for you, Steve. Surely some bad ideas can never become good. When do you know when to stop pulling the string?
I mean, all these things are contextual. I mean, good and bad is a gray, right? There's a continuum between them. Oftentimes, a lot of bad ideas are going to be a good idea at another time. In fact, that's what we're seeing today with a lot of the internet companies. Some of them are a replay of failed businesses from 15 years ago, right? But when you've got 1 billion users or on smartphones or however many billions, it's a different game. You kind of know it. I mean, if you're paying attention, you'll find something that, appears impenetrable. Okay, if that's true, then yes, all of my original motivations for pursuing this, I mean, oftentimes that's the case. You usually find some finality to, okay, one of my assumptions going into it were wrong, and if that's the case, then there's nothing further to pursue. You usually hit that wall.
Thank you. This is for you, Chris. How can someone get involved with Solve? I'm sure you have never heard that before. How can this be done remotely from another country?
So I think the honest answer is we're figuring that out. Solve is a series of convenings that started a couple of weeks ago at MIT. Many people have come to the site and asked to be part of it, have signed up to be notified and get newsletters. We're working with a lot of people who came into those first few days who are now taking the community outside, and these organic communities and events even 3 weeks later are starting to happen. So I think the short answer is raise your hand, say that you want to be involved, let me know, let us know at Solve. We'll find ways to connect. Our goal at Solve is not to do all this solving ourselves, but to empower and enable a lot of others to do that work and to make it possible to connect resources. So just as I think Raphael Reif said, just join the cause.
Thank you. AJ, this one's for you. You used the word serendipity in your presentation. When has serendipity played a role in your business?
All the time. So that's kind of where I was going to respond to that question about luck a little bit more. You can think of luck as randomness, and serendipity is another synonym for that in some sense. Where if you start to network more and more and you get involved with people that are in the right circles, things start to seem serendipitous, even though you've set the wheels in motion. You've given it the initial impulse that it needs to move, and it starts to generate a snowball effect. Where a really good example of serendipity for us was when I was going to grad school, I couldn't afford to go. And because I had invented this technology as well as a medical device, I was given a fellowship by the co-inventor of 3D printing. He was a lot more at the time interested in the medical device that I had been interested in, or that I had invented. And serendipitously, over the course of that next year, focusing on 3D printing and everything like that, we were ultimately awarded the Lemelson Prize for this invention, in particular, the automated 3D printer. So I can consider that serendipitous. A lot of the connections that I've built in and around the Boston area, and then just coming to events like this and networking with people. A lot of people will think that networking is something that's very binary. You go and meet a particular person, but you never know when you're going to meet somebody who's a third-degree connection, who knows a guy that can eventually facilitate an introduction for you. Some of the people that I'm working with now to help me figure out financing for my business are literally 5 degrees of separation from me that got I got introduced through somebody who introduced me to somebody who introduced me to somebody who ultimately introduced me to these guys. You can consider that serendipity, you can consider it luck, you can consider it good networking. It's some combination of all of them, but if you're not out there doing it, it's never going to happen.
Thank you. Here's a comment that's coming up very strong, a question. Future entrepreneurs, and that's for everyone on the panel, future entrepreneurs in Greece are practically hopeless unless they can network internationally. Who can help them and how? For example, MITEF, foundations, the state, etc.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then these other folks will have much better advice. But one of the things I find about the entrepreneurial community, the startup community worldwide, is that it's incredibly generous. People are happy to listen, to share advice, to make connections. Certainly that's true in the US. I've seen it happen throughout Europe and Southeast Asia as well. So you start with really simple things like LinkedIn with your network to identify somebody who knows somebody, as you said, who can be a sounding board. And that from there, the first ripples go. I think that we are by definition now a very highly connected global community, and it's a generous community. And I think you just need to take that deep breath, take the risk, and reach out, and that good things will come from that.
I think the problem starts from calling yourself hopeless. Because
I read that verbatim, by the way.
that just sets you back so many steps, if that's what you believe for yourself. And I can guarantee everyone that's starting a business here that this hopelessness is what you feel anywhere in the world when you start a business. It's the same thing. I live in Canada. That is not Silicon Valley. So that means that the resources, the network that exists in the Valley is not there. So I travel, I go there as much as possible. I get exposed to that. And if I go there and I can't afford to stay anywhere, I will sleep in my car. You find a way to connect with people, and you go to wherever these people are. If they're in the Valley, get yourself in the Valley.
I would say positivity begets positivity. And to your point about feeling hopeless, you need to overcome that personally. And you have to do a little bit of introspection and figure out what in the world is going to get you out of bed every day, even when your bank account is negative and you're buried in debt. What that you're working on is going to continue to get you out of bed every day? What is going to continue to motivate your employees to get out of bed every day when you can't make payroll and things like that? Things are going to turn south. Everything's not going to go great all the time. But that's okay. You need to have a positive attitude throughout the entire entrepreneurial experience. If you can't get over the hurdle of feeling hopeless to start it, there's no chance you're going to get over the hurdle of when you can't make payroll. There's no chance you're going to get over the hurdle when your first customer decides to leave you and starts talking bad about you on Yelp. There's just no chance. So start by becoming a little bit more of a positive person internally, internalize that mentality, and then shine that in a world of darkness, as you kind of want to think it that way, on everyone that's around you. And then hopefully if you can promote more and more happiness and positivity around you, that starts to get brighter and brighter, and then everyone sees the star that you are and the company that you've built.
This is a question for AJ. Here's a way of putting you in the spot and putting your money where your mouth is. Would you consider Greece as a potential market for your business?
For me or for Steve?
Sorry, the questions, I beg your pardon. The question's addressed to you, AJ.
Would Greece be a potential market? Yeah. 100%. I mean, I wish we had the funding to do the international expansion that I foresee. This is the perfect economy to have a machine that doesn't require a person to be at it and that can make anything. Why should this economy and I'm thinking globally, why should any one country be at the behest of another country for their manufacturing technologies? For the longest time, that was what made nations separate from each other. Some countries had the ability to make something that was so unique to them and that was necessary for everyday life. We saw this trend of what happened where there used to be this concept of customization. Everybody made things one-off, artisanal trades and things like that. Buildings were made by individuals that tweaked them and things like that. And then over time, we started to see things, I-beams get produced in China and flatboards getting produced in China and shipped over, and then you're just getting assembly happening, and then all of a sudden now you're just getting houses that are getting built and delivered and things like that. And when you see manufacturing happening at such a global and large scale in one place, and we're dealing with shipping things all around the world in the face of rising fuel costs, with a technology like what we invented, which is an automated factory in a box, now you can put that somewhere and enable them to become their own manufacturer. And I think that could enable the Greek economy and entrepreneurs to develop products and services that they couldn't have before. Not just because they couldn't manufacture it in 3D printing and do stuff that you couldn't do before, but now you can become your own manufacturer. You can cut out all the middlemen. You can go from the manufacturer to the customer. There's no people in between taking money just for moving your stuff around. And that, I think, is a reason that excites me about a country like Greece, is that you can bring a product here and enable people who feel like they have an idea, want to do something, don't have the technical skills to do it, but have a product in mind. And that's where our 3D printing technology really sets itself apart from other 3D printers, is we're really focused on making it so easy that all you have to do is come up with a really good idea and build a business with it.
Thank you. Steve, I'd like you to. Would you invest in Greece?
Invest? I mean, I'm sure there's many. In my business, I think it's a great opportunity for helping a country like Greece improve its connectivity. We're working with everything from the most developed countries to the least developed. I look at Greece in my particular business. Greece's topography is very challenging. It's very hilly, right? And that makes cellular coverage difficult. So driving down the cost allows you to produce more coverage, right? So it's pretty straightforward.
Here's an interesting question for everyone. I think probably quite cultural and particularly perhaps policy focused. Universities add value Startups need time and exclusive focus. Join the golden era of dropouts or admit they are not mutually exclusive? That's the question.
Definitely not mutually exclusive. I mean, I think someone should take a perspective on their life. There's a lot of experiences worth having. I remember when I was an undergrad, a good friend of mine could have been on a 3-year program. And I never understood why that was even interesting. He only gets to go through university once in his life and have such a wonderful time, have so many experiences. Why not take all 4? He ended up on the 5-year plan in the end, but that's a whole other story. So,
okay. Chris, do you have any thoughts on that?
You know, actually, I keep coming back to, and I'm sorry to take us back to another question, but this question or comment about hopelessness. So, you know, maybe it somehow will end up being an answer to this question. But I think if you are hopeless, then you are actually in a wonderful place to be an entrepreneur. Because, frankly, the only way that situation is going to change is if you decide to change it. If you decide that your hopelessness is something that you're content to live with, and that you might blame other people for, and you're going to be just happy to be grumpy for the rest of your existence, or whether you decide that you want to change it, that you're going to do something different, that you're going to get up tomorrow and do something hard, when maybe that something hard is just even getting out of bed. But that diligence, day by day, pushing forward, I think one of your quotes talked about that unwillingness to give up is what will make a difference. And I think whether you're in school as a student or whether you decide that for whatever reason you want to drop out, whether it's because you can't afford to be there any longer, because you've got this idea that's taken hold of you, or you found the right mentor who will give you a new, fresh place to start, it's really about deciding whether you're content where you are and you're going to live and wallow in your current situation, your current hopelessness, unhappiness, set of problems, or whether you're going to pull yourself up and go do something about it. And I think much of the great advances, the great innovations in entrepreneurship come from a place where I'm going to either decide to sit here and sink, or I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to make a change. And so in school, out of school, whatever, it needs to come from you, that you're going to do something about this situation that we all call the crisis, whether it's here in Greece, we've seen it elsewhere in Europe. I think there are neighborhoods in all across the United States where people are in a place of hopelessness. And the only place that changes is when individuals decide to make a difference.
Question for you, Fatima. This is a juicy one. How secure is your product? How can people be sure that their data is secure? You have a lot of power now because you have information about a person, their pulse, password by, passing for cars, computers, homes, credit cards. Question, what else does a government need in order to be able to spy on people?
Oh, privacy. So we invested in security early on, way before we actually started deploying the product. So we looked at, the vision was centralize the identity. All these points in your day where you prove to the world who you are using a physical key or a credit card, replace that with one device. Immediately, the moment you say that, you think, okay, so that needs to be very, very secure. So we couldn't rely on existing security frameworks to do that. And so we invested in a hardware solution. So the NIMI actually has its own secure key directly in the hardware that encrypts all the information on it. And you lose the NIMI that's lost with it. So it's always locked and protected inside it. But we've also looked at it from a privacy by design perspective. So there's this perception that security always contradicts privacy. So if you need to be extra secure, you need to give up information. You need to compromise your private self. But there's a lot of work that has shown repeatedly that there are ways to have win-win solutions so that privacy can be embedded into the engineering design from the get-go. In order to do that, you have to start thinking about this at the early stages of when you nail down the specifications for your system. You put it as a requirement that it has to protect privacy. And so you design that in a way that does this. In the case of biometrics, we can do that with a technology called biometric encryption. So we encrypt the biometric in a way that only the biometric itself can be decrypted. And that's an additional level of security.
Here's an interesting one, and then I'm going to go to wrap up before we go to lunch. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to provide anywhere between 1 to 3 short pieces of advice that they would give to a college student or a young entrepreneur, early stage entrepreneur in this audience. But before that, I wanted to just ask one question. What do you suggest? Seek for funding or invest on organic growth, in organic growth?
Okay, so when you're raising capital, the thing that nobody tells you about raising capital is if you go out with your hat in your hand asking for money in your hat, people will just only give you advice. It's kind of weird. The ego of the investor is something that you have to play to. So if you go to them and ask for advice, and at the end of a conversation they think that you're a very intelligent person and worth banking on, then they're going to be all the more inclined to want to give you an offer, an unsolicited offer. And that's the best kind of offer you can get from an investor. And then kind of take it on the other side, which is if you go out and just constantly are asking for money, you're like the panhandler. And it's all about the reputation that you're building and how you see yourself. And then on the side of actually thinking about growing the business organically, I'm a huge fan of that. And it depends what kind of business you are. If you're going to be a small mom and pop business where you're going to just build like maybe 3 restaurants and operate a restaurant business, you don't go to venture capitalists for that. That is a debt finance business after you've put up your own assets as collateral. You really have to understand the different options to raise capital. Not everybody is a venture-backed business. We're not a venture-backed business. You can do it different ways.
I agree that it depends on the style of the business, but not from that perspective alone. It's also if you're manufacturing something, you will need capital. And if you don't have that for your upfront payments, although you gave us great advice for how to bypass that, but you do need capital, so you want to get funded. There's just no other way. But if you're building an app, if you're building software, and you can just hang in there until you just get your first users, paying users, I would totally recommend doing that. A funded business feels very, very different from an unfunded business. It's great, but there's perils to that. There's a lot of things that you would lose. We're being recorded right now, so I'm not going to speak thoroughly about that.
Okay, I would like to conclude by going through each one of you and allowing you to share some pearls of wisdom, pieces of advice. I'm starting with you, Chris, so don't frown at me. To our audience.
Sure. Well, I want to add to the last question, so maybe it's a piece of advice, or I'll frame it as a piece of advice, which is, as a founder of a company, as the CEO of a company, your number one job, maybe your number one job is to set the vision and the course for the company. Your number 2 job is to muster resources to achieve that vision. And I don't think there is this binary choice between organic growth and venture-backed or some other equity-backed vehicle. You've got to do what you got to do to get the resources to get the company moving forward. And sometimes that resource is capital, sometimes it's people, sometimes it's a customer, whatever it is, that's your job to do. And I think you need to just keep pushing until you've actually achieved that objective. Because without that, there really is no company. The only other advice I would say is just go do. I mean, we can sit and imagine what life would be like if things were different, or we can actually get up and go try to make them different. And I think entrepreneurs are the ones who imagine quickly and then start doing for the long term.
I'll just add one thing beyond what's already been discussed. And one of the hardest things as an entrepreneur is you're constantly talking to people, you're looking for advice. And it's trying to figure out which advice is good and which advice is bad, okay? And what you'll find is most people are offering advice from a position of a particular context that they've been through. Your context might be very different. So your ability to contextualize advice is really important. The more absolute someone is about it's this way and not that way, it's probably very contextual. And that is one of the hardest lessons, and something to keep in mind. No matter who they are, how successful they are. Right? You can go to Mark Zuckerberg and he's going to tell you this is the only way to do it. Well, he's got a very particular context of getting, incredibly viral growth in building that business, right? Which might be different than what you have to do. So
that's an interesting point.
Yeah, and to echo the end of that thought, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum where viral growth isn't what matters to us. When I was talking, keeping our customer churn down and making sure that they're happy with us in the long run, that's what matters. Facebook, they could care less. If they get a new 100,000 users, they don't care if they lost 3,000 people. That's the continued thought. But the three things that I would say, and they're just three words: learn, listen, do. And do them in that order. You're here for a reason, which was to come and learn something. When you leave this room and you have an idea in your head, go talk to people that you think you want to solve problems for and ask them questions, and don't talk. Listen to them. And then once you get enough information for them about what the actual problem is and what you think the solution is, actually do it. Go out and solve that problem. So learn, listen, do. That's it.
Okay. One of the lessons that I've learned, and I've only learned it after I made the mistake a couple of times, is always be in a position where you control your destiny. And I'm actually speaking about that in the session after lunch. When you're a very, very early stage startup and you aspire to work with really big companies, perhaps big VCs as well, you're going to be in a position where you have uneven interactions with these parties, and they can slow you down. So, and you may not even be able to see that, but you have to find a way to go to market in a way that you control 100%. If you wait on somebody else, if you depend on somebody else, then you're always going to be slowed down. And there's just always a different way to do it.
Well, why don't we all put our hands together and thank our panel for a very inspirational talk.